Good morning, all. This is Drishti from People Matters, and we are back with an exciting session of our webcast in partnership with C2C OD on the topic 5 Methods of Learning to Engage the Adult Learner. Traditional learning methods are essential, but what are the areas that make learning outcomes exceptional? Learn how to attain exceptional outcomes in leadership development using 5 methods of training, design, and delivery, and 4 reinforcement strategies for increased retention. During this webinar with Michelle Cummings, co-founder of Personify Leadership, you will learn how to leverage 5 methods of learning to engage the adult learner, ways to apply the 5 methods to your own instructional design, 4 reinforcement strategies for increased retention. I will now take the pleasure to invite and introduce the speaker for today, Michelle Cummings, co-founder and chief creative officer, Personify Leadership.
Hello.
Michelle is the co-founder and chief creative officer for Personify Leadership, a leadership development course. She is an accomplished author and is a dynamic sought-after speaker and consultant in the areas of leadership, team building, and experiential learning. She has created a wide variety of facilitation, debriefing, and team building activities that have collectively changed the way trainers and educators work. Michelle holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in experiential education. Let me now tell you something about C2C Organizational Development, our partner for today's webcast. C2C Organizational Development is a high-performing team of organizational development consultants, facilitators, and content designers who believe that people are at the core of an organization's success. The team is global in presence, ethnicity, mindset, and is passionate about seeing people and organizations work better together. With in-depth experience in multiple industries and work across all layers of an organization, they bring people development and business strategy together to deliver solutions with real business impact. Being official affiliates of Kirkpatrick Partners, the only Kirkpatrick in India, C2C OD effectively assists individuals and organizations in building solid and memorable learning experiences linked to performance. Before we begin the session, let me inform the audience that we have saved time for them to ask the questions at the end of the webcast. For those who are live, can simply submit questions at any time during the session. We will try to respond to as many questions as time allows. As we have an exciting topic to discuss, without any further delay, let me invite Michelle to take over. Over to you, Michelle.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here and very excited to be representing C2C as well. We established a great partnership with C2C earlier this year when we came to India and certified several of their staff in the Personify Leadership program. So we're excited to come and share a little bit with you about what we think is really a great way to help people learn, the adult learner, and what you need to include in a program, whether you're designing something internally at your organization or whether you're seeking out a leadership development program that you'd like to deliver internally at your organization. So after this webinar, really what my goal for this is first to teach you how to leverage the 5 methods of learning that really does engage the adult learner. And with that, then we'll also try to learn ways to apply those 5 methods to your own instructional design. So we're going to use and show you how we did it with the Personify Leadership program, and then also ways for you to take some of those same concepts and then put them into your own instructional design. And then you'll also learn 4 different reinforcement strategies that would really help increase the retention for whatever program it is that you're delivering. Now, I know that many of you you've delivered a lot of leadership programs in the past, and there's a lot of great ones to choose out there. So I don't know about you, but a lot of times when people go to training, it sometimes looks something like this, to where it's death by PowerPoint, and people are just sitting in their chairs and just really bored with their learning. And so at Personify, we decided to make the learning fun. And we firmly believe that when people are engaged in what they're learning, and then they're going to retain it that much more. So the four traditional methods that most leadership development or most different types of training include are these four things: video demonstration, case studies, personal reflection, as well as group discussion. And I'm going to kind of break down each one of those and talk about why each one of those four methods are still important when you're designing your own program or when you're seeking out a program. But there's more to it than just those things. We also firmly believe that experiential activities are really what make programs exceptional. And that's one thing that sets our program apart from the other programs that are out there in the world, is that we use experiential activities to really surface the behaviors that we're trying to teach skills around. So that way then we almost catch people in their own behaviors. And then we go into the classroom and we teach skills around the behavior that happened and surfaced in the activity. And then we take it back into the classroom and we ground it in research, and we talk about why, the philosophy or the psychology behind what happened in that behavior and how do you manage it as a leader back in the real world. So video demonstrations is still one great way and one great method that the adult learner really enjoys in any type of learning environment. And so in our course, we follow a character that we have nicknamed Manny. So it's Manny the manager, and he's a frontline to mid-level leader in an organization. And we watch Manny go through the ups and downs of everyday leadership. So in some of the videos, we see Manny get it really right, and he does such a great job. And then other videos, we see Manny really mess it up. But what's important about the character and the purpose behind the video demonstration itself, that technique, is to show people that it really doesn't, that we don't want you to necessarily relate and try to not try to compare yourself to Manny and the struggles that he is, but that he's a relatable character, that everybody can see the challenges that he's going through and recognize, like, oh, I can absolutely relate to that because I experienced some of the exact same things. So if you're designing a course, you could consider something like this, to where you have a character that is familiar, that you carry all the way through the program. Or even if you have other things that you can pull in, like a YouTube video or other things like that, that might really support the concepts that you're teaching. So having a little bit of break in just the facilitator delivering all the content is really important to think about. So because there's actually research out there that shows that we only retain, that the human brain actually will only be able to stay attentive for about 20 minutes at a time. And then after that, our brains physically start to shut down a little bit. And then we start focusing on other things, like we start making our to-do list, or we think about that meeting that we had over here, or something like that, to where it really does start to shut down and our minds start to wander. And that's if you think about that, when you're designing programs, you have everyone's attention for about 20 minutes at a time. And then at that point, you've got to do something different, whether it be having a video demonstration of some sort, or whether it be having the participants get up or have a group discussion or something like that, to where it's a little bit of break in the actual teaching itself. So the next technique, or the next method that we're going to talk about, is case studies. So in case studies, this is in our program, we bring in the Chilean miner story. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard about that heroic story that happened, I think it was back in 2008, when there was a cave-in in a mine and 33 miners were trapped underground. And in that particular story, we saw an exemplary example of these 33 people that used a great amount of emotional resiliency in order to be able to survive and be able to help themselves surface with the help from the government and the rescue attempts from above ground. But the miners underground were actually doing a lot as well. So so the case studies themselves, if you can find a great example, whether it be internally at your organization where there's been a great example of where one of your managers or one of your even your C-suite leaders has done something that is related to the content that you're trying to teach, then having some sort of personal success story or some sort of success story out there in the world that you can then relate back to the learning that you're teaching can really help the learners then see great examples of this working out in the world. And really, when it comes down to it, when we're training, we're really trying to role model the behaviors that we'd like to see back out in the real world. So if you can show a case study of an individual or an organization that really demonstrated that skill really well, then that can help the participants be able to see that, and then they might actually mirror that behavior when they get back into the real world. So the next method that we want to talk about is personal reflection. Now, personal reflection we use in our program quite a bit because we recognize that not everybody that's going to be in your program is an external processor. Now, me, I'm one of those that I really like to talk out loud, collaborate with other people, but that's just my personal style. We know that there's a lot of other people that are more internal processors, and they really need to think about the skills that they're learning and have that time right there in class to be able to really apply it back to what success looks like for them in the real world. So personal reflection, allowing the time in class, is important because in general, as around the world, it's not a very reflective society anymore. I know back many years ago, the art of journaling was once really very popular, and a lot of people did it. And anymore, our lives are generally so busy that we don't have a lot of time, or we don't allow ourselves to make the time to really sit down and do that personal journaling. So creating an opportunity for you to do it in class is nice. And we actually, in the Personify program, we actually strongly recommend that whenever the participants go into personal reflection, we actually state out loud, we're really going to ask you to keep your cell phones, kind of off to the side, or in your purses, or in your pockets, or whatever, and give yourself the gift of time and really allow yourself that good personal reflection right there in class. Because how many of you have ever been to a training and you think, oh, I'll totally do that when I get back? And then as soon as you get back, you get, stuck with those hundreds of emails that came in while you were in the training, and you just don't take the time to do it. So doing it in your class, and just including that in your instructional design, can be really helpful for your participants, and that will actually help them retain the information better as well. The next method that we want to talk about is group discussion. So we talked about personal reflection and how important that is. It's also important for people to have the opportunity to share and have a group discussion about what it is that they're learning. Now, in any training that you do, the leaders and the people that are going to be in your program, you can leverage a lot of the knowledge and skills and abilities that they already have right there in your classroom. So we utilize a lot of group discussion in the Personify program because we recognize it's good for people to talk it out and hear that perspective of other people that might be in the room as well. And then also just to verbalize what it is that they're learning. And it can be very helpful and very effective in retaining that information and actually learning what it is that you're teaching them. All right, so the next, so those are the 4 traditional methods. And now I want to dive into a little bit of what we think is the exceptional, and that's the experiential activities. Now, experiential activities could be any type of simulation or game or activity that surfaces a behavior of some sort. And in the Personify program, we have 8 core competencies that we teach skills around. And so each one of those are kind of broken up into a different module. And so each one of those modules, we start out with an experiential activity. And so that activity then surfaces the behavior that we want to go back into the classroom and then teach skills around. And what's great about that is that you almost catch people in their own behaviors. And so what's great about that is, when people are at play, they are their true natural selves. It's almost like they can't help themselves. In fact, the ancient philosopher Plato was once quoted as saying, I can learn more about a person in an hour of play than a lifetime of conversation. And we totally believe that to be true. When people are at play, they are their true natural selves, and they're, really a lot of their intentions, the things that happen internally, pop out and come out in these experiential activities. And so it's a great way to really set your program apart from others, when you do something like this. And also, when people are having fun, then they're definitely retaining the information that much more. If you think about that death by PowerPoint slide that we started out with, nobody in that meeting was having very much fun. And honestly, most people, when they find out when they're voluntold that they have to go to a training, they're usually like, oh, I so don't want to give up 2 days out of the office to go to this training because of all the work that I'm going to have to do to catch up afterwards. So when you make the learning engaging and fun, then people are going to want to attend the training. And again, when people are engaged in their learning, then the return on your investment is actually so much better. In fact, there's statistics out there that show that people retain 10% of what they hear, 20% of what they see, and 70% of what they do. So if you think about that in terms of a return on your investment, wouldn't you rather, when you go to a training, wouldn't you rather retain 70% of what they were teaching? It's such a better return on your investment of time and effort and energy in order to be there. And then what you get out of it is so much more. And that statistic actually goes one step further, and you retain 90% of what you teach. So if you think about that, if you go to a training and you're learning some new skill about how to be a better communicator or anything like that, when you go back into the workplace and then you're teaching the people that you lead or the other people in your organization about some of the things that you learn, it's then going to stay in your mind. That muscle memory will continue if you teach it by 90%, which again is just a phenomenal return on your investment. So an example of an experiential activity. So if you look there at the screen and you see this large bullseye tarp, if you will, with these people standing on it, this is one of the activities that we share in our Mind of a Leader module. And I believe C2C is actually delivering this module at an upcoming conference with People Matters as well. And so you'll notice there in the ring, there's 3 different rings to this big tarp that's down on the ground. The interior ring says authority. The next ring out says influence. And the furthest ring out that you can't see there because the picture's cut off a little bit says no control. And so when we're teaching skills around emotional resiliency, we set up a couple of scenarios and we ask people to vote with their feet and stand where they would see themselves in some of the different scenarios. Is that something that you have authority over, influence over, or no control over? And we really try to help participants kind of self-analyze themselves and figure out, are they stressing over things that they have authority over, influence over, or no control over? And if you're stressing over things that you have no control over, then you've got to figure out ways to redirect that energy into something that you have authority over. So the tarp itself, we very organically sequence it to where we have them write down their stressors, we teach them the skills and go through this experiential exercise. Then we have them go back and look at the stressors that they put and categorize them in one of these 3 things. So it's a great way to very organically almost catch people, writing something down, building the skill, and then seeing where and have that personal reflection time where they really do go back and kind of reflect on what it is that you've just learned, so that they can then take action to start doing something different if it's something that they would like to change, or if they're like, no, I'm stressing over everything I'm stressing over, I have authority over, then you might be an emotionally resilient leader. So that's really great. I have a quick example that you could actually do right here sitting at your desk. If you're watching this webinar, then I have another quick, very, very quick experiential activity that we could do right here. So if if you're watching the screen and you can see me, what I'd like you to do is just make an okay sign with your hand like this, okay? And so then what I want you to do is I just want you to take that okay sign and put it right on your chin. Okay, now most people's chins are down here. So I'm curious, did you actually follow what I did or what I said? So this is a great example in one of the skills that we teach in one of our modules around how to walk the talk and how to make sure that your actions match your words as a leader, is that we teach people will do what you do rather than what you say. And so they you know, it's one of those concepts that you've heard over and over again. You're like, okay, people will do what you do rather than what you say. But then you do an exercise like this, take the okay side, put it right on your chin. Now, most people's chins, of course, are down here. So I'm going to guess that a few of you out there in the audience totally followed what I did rather than what I said, right? So I see someone just chimed in and said, that was a good one. I too had my chin at my cheek, or my okay sign at my cheek. So it's one of those where you, again, we catch you in your own behaviors, and then you're like, I'm sure several of you that were right here were like, oh my god, she said chin and I totally followed what she did, right? So in that module, that's in the Feet of a Leader module in Personify. That's just a little mini example of an experiential that we do. We have a much longer experiential to teach that same concept, but that's one that I could do right here with you just to show you. It's when we can laugh at ourselves and the behaviors that we do, we're like, oh my gosh. And now we go back into the classroom and we teach skills around what it means to walk the talk, and how people, if I have that self-awareness as a leader, that people are going to follow what I do rather than what I say, then it's good for me to know that, because then that not only works for positive behaviors. It'd be great if if when we were out there in the world that people only followed our positive behaviors. But we all have those behaviors that we don't necessarily want people to do as well. For me personally, I'm a procrastinator. Self-admitted, I don't like it. It's one of those things that I wish I wasn't such a bad procrastinator and put things off to the last minute, but I do. But I don't want my staff to model that. But again, people are gonna do what I do rather than what I say. I could tell them all day long not to be a procrastinator, but if they see me doing it all the time, then they're gonna do it as well. So anyway, it's an example of how the experiential activities, they're fun, they get people engaged, they get them laughing and learning, and then it really does help solidify that muscle memory in the learning when they go back into the workplace. So, however, one thing that we like to always say about the experientials, though, it is not just one thing to just play games and just have activities. It's that also you've got to integrate the experiential into the skill building. So on your screen here, you'll see we've got this model here that we call the DRAIN model. And this was created by Frank LaFausto and Carl Larson out of the University of Denver. And they wrote a book several years ago called When Teams Work Best. And so we have an experiential activity that we do that surfaces the behaviors of what happens when you have a team, when the goal is really clear, but when your mental, physical, and spiritual energy are all aligned towards that goal, that's when you're going to have success. But if you have something that is funneling some of that energy away from the goal, then it's going to have an impact on whether or not your team is successful and whether they can accomplish their goals. And so it's one thing to have just the activity, but it's another to take that activity, build, and combine those skills with it. So that way we're not just occupying people's time and having fun. There's real true intent and purpose behind why we're using the experiential activities. So using the multiple methods is critical when you're designing your own program internally. And so it's one of those that with that particular model, the DRAIN model, we then have them after they have the experiential activity, and then we teach them the model. We then have them go into personal reflection and really help set goals for themselves, both for themselves, their teams, and then also just reflecting on how the organization will benefit if the leader and the team are all accomplishing goals. How is the organization going to benefit at the same time? So those are the 5 main methods of learning that to think about when you are designing your own course or when you're looking for a course that you'd like to bring into your organization to deliver to your teams as well. So what I'd like to talk about next then is talk about those 4 reinforcement skills or 4 reinforcement tools to take now what we've learned and make sure that people are actually utilizing them and implementing them back into the real world. So the 4 different reinforcement skills that I want to share with you today is first is ongoing and follow-up coaching. How do you make sure that that the person that was going through the training has that ongoing support that they need in case they still have questions, or in case there's a skill that they've identified that they really need to have developed a little bit more. How do you make sure that they have the skills and resources that they need in order to keep implementing what they learned? The next one is to help create feedback loops. And so we've got a tool that we've designed that I'm going to share with you as well. And then also just the use of technology. How do we, in this technology-driven world, use that to our advantage when we're looking at the training that we have created and ask people to go through? How do we leverage that and then utilize it to help reinforce learning? And then last but not least is anchor tools. We've got a couple of great ideas around what we think is a great way to anchor that learning back into the real world. So ongoing coaching and follow-up. So this is an important one. In the Personify program, one thing that we do in the program is towards the end, it's a 2-day program. And towards the end of the program, we have them identify and connect with what we call an accountability partner. And this is somebody that has also been through the same course that they have, that they can then routinely check in with. So because they've got the common knowledge, the common language, and even the common experiences that they had in the class, that they can then touch base with. And we recommend, and we have them actually set time in their calendars for at least the next 90 days out from when they ended the program to when they at least have their last assigned meeting with their accountability partner. We recommend they check in about every 2 weeks, but at least every 30, 60, and 90 days. And with that, it can just be a quick phone call, or they can meet in person if it's somebody that is either in the office or lives nearby, and really that it helps the leader or the participant really be accountable to somebody else and not just to themselves. Because I'm sure there's many of you, if you've ever set goals for yourself, it's one thing to set them, it's another to accomplish it. And so having that accountability partner really can help. Another thing that we do in our program is that we have a manager prep, a manager form, as well as the participant form. We have both parties fill it out, so that way then they can keep checking in with one another, and to see if the manager can see that the skills of the leader have really been being developed and whether they're actually implementing what they learned when they got back into the real world. So the next method, or the next their next technique that we use for ongoing support is creating feedback loops. Now, feedback loops is a way for, once the participant gets back into the real world, that they can create some sort of way to get feedback from the people that are going to see them trying on these new skills, and seeing if they're actually doing them well, or if they need a little bit more skill development. And so what we do is we created a deck of cards that we call declaration and feedback cards. And this really was designed to where, once the participant comes through the program, of the 8 different competencies that we teach in the course, we, through the 2-day program, you really do start to identify. There's some that you're like, you know what, I think I do this one pretty well. And then there are others that you're like, oh, there it is. There's my development opportunity. And so with that, we have, each leader identify or self-identify at the end of the program, what's the 1 or 2 skills that they most want to work on when they get back into the workplace. And so once they do this, the feedback cards that we give them at the end are just really small. It's about the size of a deck of playing cards. And they're pretty much blank cards with some instructions that we encourage them to hand out to the people that they're going to work closely with. So that way, then they can and basically just have a quick conversation with them and say, "Hey, I'm going to be, maybe if I chose listening, I need to be a better listener as a leader." Then I would go to the people that I work closely with and say, "Hey, I'm really going to try to be a better listener and utilize some of those new skills that I learned in this class. So I'm going to hand you some of these feedback cards. And if you see me demonstrating the skill well, where you're like, wow, Michelle really, I could tell she was really listening to me in that last meeting or in that last conversation we were having, then jot a quick, something down on that card and then bring it back to me and let me know what was it that you saw me doing that was different, and how did you see me really demonstrating this well?" So it's a way for them to get some feedback back from the people that they're interacting with every day. All right, the next one that we're going to do, and that's actually that one. There's still the feedback loops. That gives a little bit more picture of the actual, when we give them to the participants in the class, how they are checking them out and getting ready to take them back into the workplace. Now, technology is another one that is important for you to think about when you're designing your own program. How can you use technology to really help reinforce learning? And so we have found a platform that we use that we then remember I told you about that character that we have in our program called Manny. And so we utilized a platform to where we have this texting service, and we call it Mobile Manny. And so at the end of the program, we have everyone text a keyword to a phone number, and then that's Mobile Manny on the other end. And what Manny's going to do then is through the onboarding process, he just asks a couple questions. What are some of the goals that you just set for yourself? And what are the few competencies that you most want to work on back in the real world? And so what's great about that then is Manny then sends the participants a few texts every week. Some of them are just reinforcement texts around the skills that they learn, but others could be around, if I chose ears and wanting to be a better listener back in the workplace, then Manny can send me some texts every once in a while that says, "Hey, are you have you been demonstrating how to be a leader who truly listens to others in your current meetings?" And really and ask you a couple of like reflection questions. And some of them requires a response back, and some of them are just ones that are more reinforcement. And then he also asks, what are some of the goals that you set in the program, whether they be a 30-day, a 60-day, or a 90-day goal. And then Manny will text you some reminders about those throughout the course of the next 30 to 60 days. So what we love about it, and the feedback that we get from the participants that are utilizing this, is that Manny has this uncanny sense of being able to send a text like almost in the precise right moment, where you're like, "Oh, there it is. Look at that." It's one of those like, being delivered a message from the universe kind of thing. So anyway, that's one of the ways that we use that we are using technology to reinforce the skills. Another way that you can do it is by bringing in TED Talks or lunch and learns or something like that, to where you actually bring in some of that technology and have a live webinar or a live lunch and learn with an author of a book or something like that. Have everybody read the book ahead of time. Have some discussion questions, at the lunch tables, and then being able to have the live stream the author themselves or something like that. So you can get really creative, or even if it's just a team meeting or something like that, playing a short 3-minute YouTube video or a TED Talk or something like that around a topic or a skill that you're trying to reinforce can be a great way to utilize that technology to your advantage to help reinforce the learning that you had in the classroom. All right, and the last reinforcement tool that we want to share with you is what we call anchor tools. Now, anchor tools are a great way to let your participants go home with something tangible from your course. So we have a couple things that we give out to our participants at the end of the course so that they really can go home and put these reinforcement tools in places that are going to be helpful for them, so they can, when they see that visual reminder, it helps them to really stay on task with implementing those new skills that they learned. So one of the things that we do now, the Personify program, the skills that we teach are all anchored in metaphors around the body. So in the heart of a leader, we talk about how to be a leader who leads with intention and truly looks out for the best interests of others. In the mind of a leader, we talk about how to be emotion resilient. In the voice and the ears of a leader, those are where we our communication skills that we teach around how to be a true listener, and then how to deliver a message that will really resonate with your receiver. And so in the hands of a leader, we talk about how to provide direction and support, especially if you're a leader that has gone from being a peer to now all of a sudden being in a leadership role or in a management role. How to go from being on the at the same level of the organization of them to being their boss now, and so some people have no idea how to delegate tasks because they have been the same level for so long. So we have a fantastic delegation model that we teach in the course. And then in the feet of a leader, I talked about that one a little bit with this activity. But that one we teach skills around how to be a leader who walks the talk, and how to make sure your actions match your words. And then in the spine of a leader module, we talk about how to have that courageous conversation when you need to have it, how to be a leader who's courageous in tough times. And Angela Siebele is my co-founder, and she's the chief executive officer at Personify Leadership. And she wrote a book this last year called The Courageous Leader, which is it's a fantastic, wonderful book around the spine of a leader. And it's something that she's truly gifted in. And it's a fantastic book. So that's actually one of the giveaways that we give away as well in the course. It's a continued deeper dive into the material. So that way, once you go through the course, because a lot of times when you go through a really full 2-day course, it can sometimes feel like you're drinking water through a fire hydrant, because it's so much information coming at you at one time, that it is helpful to be able to have a tool then to go back that you can a little bit slowly, go through a little bit more slower, and really devour the information. So one of the anchor tools, and then we have the eyes of a leader. That's the final one. The eyes of a leader is how to be a leader who has a vision for the future. And we intentionally put that module at the very end so that leaders can then look at what does leadership look like for me next? Now that I have these new skills, what do I want it to look like? And that's where we have them set 30, 60, and 90-day goals and things like that. So part of the anchor tools that we use in the program is that once each leader has self-selected which competency they most want to work on back in the real world, we have them pick one of those body parts and actually have them take it home with them. And we tell them, please put this somewhere where you're going to see it often, every day. So that way it's that visual reminder. It's that, it's that cue. It's that like, oh, that's right. So especially if I want to be a good listener. Now, if you notice there in the photo on the screen, you'll see a photo of a suitcase with some shoes and a suit, and then this ear that has been placed in this suitcase. And we had one leader that went through the program, and he selected the ear. It was proclaimed that he was a terrible listener. So he took this ear with him everywhere he went. So, and this was him. He actually was flying to Chicago for a training, and then he literally packed his clothes and packed his suitcase and then packed his ear. And he happened to snap a picture of it and then send it to us. And he goes, "I told you I was going to put this places where I was going to see it. And this particular meeting, he really needed to be a good listener. So he just took it with him." So it's kind of great, and it's fun for us to see where participants have placed these out in the real world, whether it be sitting on their desk or somewhere else. And we tell them, put it somewhere conspicuous where you're going to see it all the time, because it really does help reinforce that learning. So any type of takeaway that you can create an attached learning to, and it's not just like a bookmark or something that just has the skills written on it. In our minds, or in my mind, it's nice for it to have some sort of emotional attachment to it, to where it's something for this is the skills they really want to learn when they get back into the workplace. So so it's helpful to come up with some sort of anchor tool that really does anchor them back to the learning that they had in your program, and so it can really help them just to actually implement those skills back in the workplace when they get back. So that's the 4 different reinforcement tools and the 5 methods of learning. So I hope you were able to pick up a few nuggets, from the webinar and from the slides and things like that, and learn a little bit about the Personify Leadership Program. So I know that we've got a little bit of time left for some questions here. So I'm going to pass it back over to Drishti now.
Thank you, Michelle. So thank you for sharing the great insights and the great stories that you've shared. I think it was really interesting.
Oh, good.
So the experiential learning bit specifically that you talked about, you have shared that how it can be done and some activities you shared from your own experience. So uh, my question is that, when we talk about experiential learning, what are the skills or areas you think that it has the most impact in? Like if you want to train them, so what skills or areas has been more impactful, and what are the skills that are difficult to probably teach through experiential learning and traditional tools work better there?
That's a really great question. I think probably some of the, I would say a lot of the requests that we get for experiential activities is around communication. I think that's one of those where people, we always want to be better communicators with the people that we lead within our teams. And so, so I have several communication activities kind of in my back pocket that I use often. But I would say those are probably the ones that, in my mind, and just from my experience, are the easiest to create experiential activities, or to find experiential activities that you could do with your programs. I would say the ones that are a little trickier and a little harder to do are around integrity and ethics. I think those are a little bit harder. It can still be done, but I think sometimes it's harder to find activities that that really truly match that exact topic.
Okay, all right. And also, you shared something about the follow up, and you have a manager form, which where you that was a very interesting piece. If you can maybe double click on that and elaborate more, that how do you check, because that is one area that companies and learning leaders usually struggle with. That how do we show that whether they are implementing this learning in their job or not? So how do
Yeah.
you? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So in our program, because we have the specific skills that we teach under each competency, we basically have a rating system that we give both the participant and to the manager. So we have the participant rate themselves on how well they think they do in each one of these skills before they go through the program. And we have the manager do the same thing. And then we invite them to meet before the participant goes through the training. So that way they can see whether they're on the same page about those things or not. Then post-program, we have them do the same thing again, is to go through, and now that I have these new skills and now that I've got this new learning, then they can, after a few months, after either the 30, the 60, or 90 days have passed, and they've really had an opportunity to practice those things, have them do those same self-assessments again, both the participant and the manager. And then that way, it's an opportunity for them to really get good feedback on how I've really seen you working on this, or how I have seen no change whatsoever.
So there was another piece that I found really interesting, which was on personal reflection. Not many people practice that, and that would have been a challenging area to implement as well. So how can organizations, in especially the smaller ones, I think that could be and you can share your own opinion on this, but probably this can be a very useful tool for smaller organizations that don't have big budgets for, uh, and it could be a very very beneficial tool for them. So if you can elaborate more on that and how can smaller organizations maybe utilize that tool.
So the self-reflection tool, that's the great thing about it, is that it's it doesn't have to cost anything, for you to be self-reflective, right? So it's a matter of whether you've rolled out new content, or you've just had a big meeting, and um, you've everyone has now really been given new direction on what they need to do, or something like that. There's been a big change or anything like that. Implementing self-reflection can be one of those to where, once people have been given a piece of information, for them to carve out the time to actually reflect on it, and then do a check-in again. And again, it's part of that ongoing coaching and reflect and support as well, is to actually book time in people's schedule for actual self-reflection. And um, from a business point of view, it sounds a little strange, almost just like, what, take 15 minutes to just, reflect on what we're learning or what we're doing. It sounds kind of silly, but really, if you allow that time and then also do the follow up with it, it's amazing how much it probably will actually improve performance rather than take away from it.
So we have one question coming from Vijay Kumar, who's asking if you can share your experience on behavioral soft skills, basically. And there's another question that he's asking, and it's on how to deal with passive learners.
That's such a great question. So
Yeah.
the first one, experience on behaviors and soft skills. So for really the soft skills, I'm assuming, if you can actually clarify on that a little bit, are you talking more about like when like the way people communicate with one another? Is that what you're referring to for soft skills? So I'll give you a second to reply to that, and I'll talk about the how to deal with passive learners. Passive learners are some of my favorites, actually, because I like to challenge them. So, and a lot of times passive learners show up, totally like this, arms crossed. They are, you can just tell that they're not very engaged. And so a lot of times I will challenge people. And one of my favorite phrases that I use with them is, you're going to get out of the day what you put into the day. And so, so if they truly are just sitting at the back of the room, arms crossed, on their phones all the time, they're going to get zero out of the training. And so a lot of times I first give them the opportunity to, after I've said this phrase and given them opportunities to participate. If they're still not participating, then I will sometimes just give them a role. And so if I'm doing an experiential activity, I will say, oh, you know what? I could really use some help with this next activity. I'd love for you to be an observer, and I'm going to point to you and ask you a couple questions when we go to debrief this activity. So just take a few notes on different behaviors or things that you observe during the actual activity itself. Well, now they know that you're going to call on them, and so now their level of engagement changes a little bit. They might not be 100% doing what I want them to do by choosing to not participate, but at the same time, I've still given them a role and kind of let them know I'm not going to let you just sit back at the back of the room and do nothing. And so anyway, so that those are a couple of my little tricks that I use with the passive learners.
So I think Vijay is not replying, but probably what he meant by soft skills was that there are two aspects. Like one is the technical domain skills, and then we talk about other behavioral skills. Like you gave example of integrity also, for example.
Yeah.
So aspects like that probably he's talking about.
Okay. So yeah, so the behavioral skills, those are some of the easiest to actually put the experiential activities towards. And so if you think about it, if there's some sort of behavior that you want to change in either an individual, or even if it's something culturally you want to change throughout the organization, um, that's usually where you can pop in an experiential activity to service the behavior safely and naturally through the activity itself. And that's where I bring in the experientials all the time, because it's one thing to call somebody out on a behavior that you want them to change, just one-on-one. It can be a hard conversation. They might get really defensive and things like that. But if I can surface that same behavior that I want to now talk to somebody about changing or doing differently through a game, I can now refer to the behavior through the game itself and talk about, like, all right, so when that behavior surfaced in the game, was that helpful for our team, or did it detract from what we were trying to do, and accomplishing the goal? And usually that's the case. So if that's the case, we say, well, this can we think of anything? Can we relate that back to the real world? And that's one thing that we do in the experiential activities is after each one is finished, we stop and we debrief it and we talk about what just happened in the activity, why is that important, and then how does that relate back to the real world? So if there's some sort of behavior then you're wanting to change through that soft skill, then you can surface the behavior through the activity, and then in the debrief talk about how does it apply back to the real world.
Okay. So Michelle, for the leaders who have been applying the traditional modes and everything, how do you convince or make a case for experiential activities and make them understand that it can really work, especially in the initial phases, probably when you worked with some organization who was doing it for the first time? So what kind of challenges or resistance did you see in them?
Yeah. Well, so one thing that I usually like to do is use those same statistics that I gave earlier in the training, and that 10% of what we see, 20% or 10% of what we hear, 20% of what we see, and 70% of what we do. I use that statistics a lot, because I've been in the experiential world for most of my career, about 20 to 25 years now of doing experiential activities. So it's not a new battle for me. It's one of those that that you have to defend often, because for some people it looks like you're just playing games, right? And so really you have to, when you come in with armed with statistics like that show really, we're going to retain 70% of what we do, and that's really the end goal of why we're doing training. We actually had one participant, or one of our certified trainers here in the States, actually, he wanted to see what the return on investment was for his leaders going through this program, because he was having to make a hard case as to why invest in this program, why experientials. And so he used a variety of different data. But in the end, when it all calculated out, he was able to show a 204% return on his investment. And then after that, the organization was like, okay, we'll invest in this if that's truly what he saw through his pilot group. So anyway, so it's little things like that can be helpful.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. So another thing that you talked about towards the last was the anchor, like creating an anchor, and that really helps them relate to their job and retain as well. So if you can share one practice or one way in which it can be done.
A different anchor tool?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So one of my favorite anchor tools to use is, so if you had a variety of different postcards, right? So postcards, when you go on vacation and you see all these postcards from all these great places that you visited, they could be anything from, a hot air balloon to a tropical scene to a mountain scene, like have a variety of different pictures on postcards, and then just scatter them out in front of your participants. And then what you can do is ask them to connect an experience that they had in the program back to one of the pictures that they see in the postcards. And so there's some personal reflection that they're doing, because they're making a choice between an experience that they had and one of the pictures on the cards. And then once they've selected that card, have them turn it over and then write a quick, jot themselves a quick letter about why, what are the learning that they got out of the training, and then pick a date as to when they want to receive this letter. And so I have a filing system in my office here to where I have January 1st through December 31st. And so when a participant puts on a letter. I would like to receive this letter on March 31st. Then one of my admin in my office, they back up about 5 days prior to when they wanted to receive that letter, throw a stamp on it, and send it off. And so it's a great way to get a little message from yourself, from the universe on a day that you select, that really does anchor back to the learning that you had back in the classroom. So, and that'd be an easy one. You can just go to Google Images and, create your own set if you wanted to as well. Or purchase some, stock photography off of a stock photography website or something like that. And it would be really easy to create your own set of, metaphoric picture cards.
That's really great. I don't know about the audience, but I'm surely going to try that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's another question that we are receiving. The question is from Puneet. And the question is that, could you share some of the interventions to make people align to value systems of the organization?
That one is that's a great question, and it's a tough one. How do you even know if you have all your people aligned to the value system of the organization? We have actually an activity that we do. It's an experiential activity, to where we actually have people sit down and think about what are their values, their personal values, and how do they align with the organizational values. And so, so if you can categorize those somehow, maybe your organization even has, a value statement or something. So if you can take that and then kind of break it down a little bit, and then give people some choices on what are some of their personal values, and do your personal values align with the values of the organization? And again, have a good group discussion about it. Have them do some personal reflection around it. And it's amazing how just talking about it really can help surface it to where people can make a decision whether they're on board or whether they're not on board. And is there anything that they could do differently that could help change that? So anytime you have to impose or talk about an intervention tool of any kind, those are not easy conversations to have. A lot of times I use a quick metaphor of the stoplight, to where you've got, red, yellow, and green. And when you talk about what are some things I need to stop doing, what are some things I need to be careful of, and what are some things that I need to continue doing. And I think you could probably use that same metaphor when it comes to, whether people are not aligned with the value system of the organization. Are there behaviors that they're doing that they just need to stop doing? Are there things that they're kind of in that yellow area to where they need to be careful of? And are there things they're doing really well that they really do align well with the organization? So, so sometimes just presenting something that is, that has that picture of the stoplight, again, can help create that safe environment to sometimes have maybe even a hard conversation. Anytime you have to talk about how to stop it, is there a behavior I need to stop doing? It's going to be a little bit harder conversation to have with people.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. So as we have only 1 minute left, so probably the other questions that we couldn't pick up, you can probably take it offline.
Okay.
And yeah, so with this, we'll wrap up today's session. And I would like to thank Michelle for her time and sharing the invaluable information and her knowledge and experience and a lot of great stories with all of us. I would also like to thank our partner, C2C OD. And the audience, for the audience, you can provide your feedback in the survey link provided in the chat section because your input matters. With this, we'll conclude today's webcast. Stay tuned for many more such exciting sessions. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.